Good morning. I am Cyrus Cassels. I'm a recent poet laureate of Texas. And so far this morning has been an incredible reunion for me. Stephanie Pruitt was my student in Cave Canem almost 20 years ago. And I first got to know Camille when she invited me to contribute to the Black Nature Anthology. The same for Stephanie. If you're not familiar with that anthology, you should be, as well as her new book, Soil. I'm going to read just 3 poems from a book of mine called The Gospel According to Wild Indigo, which is a celebration of Gullah culture of the Carolinas, where my family's from, and the Sea Islands. I'm going to start with the poem that's been selected for the exhibition today. It's called Wild Indigo, Because. When rice was our nemesis and callus making cotton, and the onus of a Satan-hot tobacco seemed to stain our very souls, beyond the spirit-choking pest houses of Sullivan Island, our Ellis Island, beyond the dust and ragtag squalor of Slave Row, we found a dew-soaked purplish blue in the needed time. Imagine in a siren patch behind the blacksmiths, a God-sent and doe wild blue. This poem is in the voice of a slave woman. It's called The White Iris Beautifies Me. Not the white of hard-won cotton or a pitiless snow. I've found a whiteness that gives me its glory. It blooms in Master Belmare's garden, and though it is, by all accounts, untouchable, quiet as it's kept, I've carried it into the shabbiest of cabins, worn it as I witnessed the slave breaker, the hanging tree. In dream snatches, it blesses me, and I become more than a brand, a pretty chess piece at the mistress's bell, always prudent and afraid, wily and afraid. And when the day comes, my rescuing flower's name will become my daughter's. A freeborn woman, I swear she will never be shoeless in January snow. Bold Iris, she will never fear sail or the bottom of the sea. And one more poem in the voice of the indigo, A Siren Patch of Indigo. Listen, though we swell as rampant woodland or riverbank blossoms, Baptisia australis, in your tensile world, as commonplace beauty and reachable remedy, as soothing eyewash for the Osage, hardy dye for the Cherokee. We're more akin to clearing and hillside wayshowers, offhand griots quietly reminding you the punishing rose, the grim night world of the Middle Passage, was never your true province. Even in appalling cab chains, the light of your integrity, your inmost wonder, still encircled you, resolute, inviolate. Always recalled your progeny of Sea Island slaves. In galling dearth or in Juneteenth glory, our deep, annealing, sacramental blue belongs to you.
Good morning. I'm so honored to be here to moderate this panel today. In the interest of time, Lucas, you printed out this beautiful intro sheet for me, but I'm actually just going to summarize. I hope you don't mind. But we have three very, very brilliant folks on the stage, so I want to make sure we have enough time to have a good, informal conversation. So first, starting with Miss Armenia.
Bom dia. Good morning.
Yes. Looking into your work, just the way you have worked so hard to preserve and explore Afro-Brazilian foodways and culture in general, I'm so excited to speak with you today.
Thank you.
And also, you gave me the best compliment backstage. You said you look like family.
Yes, you do.
Which was so sweet. Next to Miss Armenia, we have Adrian Lipscomb, who, in addition to being a chef and a baker, also has a degree in urban planning.
In architecture?
And architecture, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that, yes. And has deep ties to Texas, Austin, Texas in particular.
Sixth-generation Texan. Yeah, originally from San Antonio.
Yes.
Born and raised. Yeah.
Amazing. And Vaughn.
Hi, Portia.
Hi. Brilliant, brilliant author. 2 brilliant books in the lobby that you should absolutely check out, Islas and Coconut and Collards. I think of you as like a researcher who does work to explore and really highlight home cooking in tropical environments, which is so important.
Thank you. Thanks, y'all.
So we're gonna jump in. I wanna hear from each of you, starting with Ms. Armenia, about garden spaces that you think of or that have meant a lot to you in your life.
I grew up in a yard. We had a big yard growing up back in Vitória, Brazil, where I'm from. And one of my favorite parts of the yard was the front yard, because that was the front of the house and where also a space where my mother, she made clothes. So I realized, wow, she spent so many hours here. I want to put something beautiful for her to look out. So I started working with impatiens. We call 11 horas back home, the little beautiful flowers. Yeah. And then I started to realize, because I started very young, said, interesting, because I put in this limp little flower, and then the following day, she's standing. So I started saying, well, this, whatever is here, has life and gives food for them to survive. So my mother said, yes, you're right. O chão, where you step, is alive. And then when the rain comes, that was one of my favorite part of being the yard. When that's, the summer showers that we have that comes real fast and then just goes away, and the scent of the soil. That's what I miss the most. That we don't have that much any longer, But I hold those memories in my heart. And then in the back of our yard, we had the herbs where we grew the food. And when I was thinking about it, and then all my aunts, because that's what our space. Oh, I need alecrim, Hermina. Go there and go grab some alecrim, rosemary. Go get the cilantro for our muqueca to make our fish. So I grew up learning about all these herbs and the importance they have for my cuisine today.
Adrian, what about you?
I had the pleasure of knowing my great-grandmother, and during the summer where we would pick the beans and the peas and stuff from the garden, and we would sit on the porch and we would snap them. And being in Texas, we also had pecans. And so they said, wouldn't it be fun to pick up all the pecans? As a little kid, you were like, yeah, until you were like middle of it, like this ain't fun no more, so we don't want to do this anymore. But for me was really finding the relations of food, and especially within season, because my great-grandmother would teach all of us, especially about the canning and the preserving, and we could go and see the cans, and she would tell us to go get a certain can, go get the peaches, and you were always fear that you were going to pick up the figs, because you didn't want figs, you wanted the peaches, But also, she taught us how to read the plants. So, and I talk about it often, especially with my great-grandmother, how to read the greens and really analyze them and look at them as we were triple washing them. We would see the soil and where it came from. We could see if the farmer was doing well by, if the plant was whittled or if there were holes, if there were a lot of bugs. So she was teaching us how not only to grow these things, but how to utilize these parts of the plants and every part of the plant. And so today I teach my own daughter and my children how to read the greens.
I was born in Puerto Rico, but I grew up in the suburbs outside of Atlanta, and my people are city and suburban people. So I'm jealous of the experiences that y'all have had, because we largely grew pretty things. But the garden that I remember the most was my grandmother's marquesina in Puerto Rico. A marquesina is a screened-in porch, but typically in most Puerto Rican houses, it's just metal grates, right? Most Puerto Rican houses are sort of concrete blocks, right? At least where my grandmother lived, with metal shutters, right? So they're these kind of very static, stiff spaces. But the marquesina was an incredible greenhouse, and it had 7 different kinds of ferns and helechos, we call them, and just beautiful, beautiful green leafy things that created a wonderful space that blocked out the street and the busy traffic that was running by the house and sort of protected us from the outside world. So that's the garden I remember the most.
That's beautiful. When thinking about this panel, I was thinking about my last time in St. Thomas, which my mom's side of the family is from, and my Uncle Bobby, who's my great uncle, but I call him Uncle Bobby, every morning he goes out to the bush and he clips different herbs. He clips mint, he clips basil for bush tea. And I just grew up with that as like, you don't have coffee, you have bush tea. And getting older and realizing the brilliance and ingenuity of that, the nutrients that you would get from pouring hot water over fresh herbs every morning. And he's in his 70s and looks about 50. So it must be working. Miss Armenia, I'm curious, when you moved to New York in 1981, correct?
Yeah, 82, 83, I moved to New York, yes. Because
Okay.
I was in Minnesota.
Oh, yes,
yes.
prior to, which you and Adrian have a Midwest
It's
connection
cold.
here.
Cold Minnesota, oh Lord.
Yes, Adrian, you were in Wisconsin, right?
Correct.
Yes.
And it's cold too, yes.
Yes. But I'm curious, when you were wanting to make dishes from home, were there any sort of substitutions you had to make or different ingredients that you found here that weren't available back in Brazil?
Well, I always say that I felt very blessed to come to New York, because in New York we have great Brazilian stores that you can go to, and I can get the products that I need. Like in New Jersey, we have big supermarkets in Astoria. You know, like just this past week, I went there to get some pão de queijo. I owe you that, Jessica. You know, so I'm grateful that I can find most of the ingredients that I need from back home. I can find right here in New York City. Yes.
Adrian, I'd love to hear about your 40 Acres project. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so 40 Acres project started in 2020. I owned a restaurant in cold Wisconsin, and at that time, my restaurant worked as a farm to table, and during COVID, what was happening is that a lot of my farmers were losing their contracts to restaurants, even schools and other vendors, because they were shutting down, and they were either receiving money or not receiving money as part of from the government. But I had this fear of, like, if they were having problems, which majority were not Black, what was the Black community doing? And which led me down a very large rabbit hole, which ended up being a huge canyon, because there was this gap of knowledge of finding Black farmers and access to them. So what I did is that, as a chef, I started making a lot of phone calls to organizations and also looking for Black farmers to find out who had access to land, because that was the largest problem. And I decided I was going to raise money to buy access to Black land and for Black agriculture, but also to preserve Black foodways. And so within the first year, we did a GoFundMe, and we raised enough money along with other chefs to purchase our first set of land in St. Helena Island, which is about 40 acres, in fact. And at this point, we're looking at another farm up in the Midwest where it's very cold. But our project really was just more of a catalyst to stem other people to start thinking about the diversity within agriculture and the lack of support in different realms of cultures, and especially within the African American culture.
That project is so moving because it creates this reconnection to Black land. And I really wanted to ask those questions for y'all to get a sense of just how many views we have. It's called Views from the Diaspora. And at first, when I was thinking about moderating this, I was like, that's so huge. Like there's so much ground to cover. And speaking of that, for your book, Islas, Vaughn, you traveled all over the world to see how people are using their cooking spaces and gardens to preserve their history, to feed their families, in some cases as business. Can you talk about some of the things you saw and connections and similarities you saw during your travels?
Yeah, so my book is Islas, a celebration of tropical cooking. And I spent 2 years studying the communities and foodways of tropical island communities across the planet. Much of it was written amidst the pandemic, so I didn't get to go to all the places I would have liked to, but the book is organized by technique, because the tropics are a vast region, right? It's this band that hugs the earth. And there are millions of people and millions of cultures and tens of thousands of islands. And how on earth can you organize such a vast space? But what I learned as I started doing research, and what inspired me to even approach this project, was that I found that islanders cook in particular ways that are deeply connected to ancestry and to a kind of profound global ancestry, right? These formative ways of cooking. So marinating ingredients that are perhaps either tough or flavorless, pickling and fermentation to preserve, particularly in times of abundance, deep frying, right? A way that you cook when you have access to abundant oil, and when you do a lot of outdoor cooking, as people do in the tropics. Braising and stewing, which is absolutely the most common cooking practice I've seen across the planet, but particularly in the tropics, a way of making use of ingredients that you have on hand in a way that can feed your entire family, or your village, or your extended family. And then steaming inside of leaves, right? And grilling and smoking over open fires. So the first similarity I saw was that in all of these places across the planet, people cook in the same ways. I also saw a tremendous similarity of ingredients that I wasn't necessarily expecting. Rice, which is growing here in the African American garden, in the Diaspora garden. People eat rice all over the tropics, and they eat it in like such similar ways. So a rice with a protein, with a starch, and a sauce. All over the planet, right? Yeah. Different sauces, different spices, different kinds of proteins, but that same iteration. And ingredients like eggplant, which I didn't necessarily everywhere on the planet, capsicum or peppers, both spicy and sweet, all kinds of different citruses, uses of vinegar, which is also using acid to preserve and season food. It's a tremendously resilient and useful way of taking a natural scientific process, right? Many things become vinegar on their own, to actually make sure that in times of scarcity you have enough. So those were some of the initial similarities that I saw. Coconuts, right? Coconuts used in all of their iterations: water, oil, flowers, meat, coconut. The outside of a coconut can be burned and used as an insect repellent. Coconut husks can be used as vessels of all different sorts, right? Not just coconut bras, right? But actually like to eat out of, because that's a myth. That's a myth. I think that I expected. I mean, I proposed this book because I had a theory. I was like, I already see a connection, but what I wasn't necessarily expecting was how profound that connection was, and also how much healing ingredients were just being infused into food, right? So earlier Camille said, right, that things aren't just are pretty and functional, right? So achote or anato, the kind of seed that is beautiful, it colors your food, sort of acts like saffron might, right? Beautiful, beautiful color of food, is also a very powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant, right? Turmeric, same, right? Oregano, which has all kinds of healing properties and is very good for your skin, is all up in our food, right? Capsicum, chiles, peppers of all sorts actually cool you down in the heat. It seems counterintuitive, right? But when you eat a spicy thing, it actually helps your body sweat, and it will help you cool down. So there are all these ways that I found that tropical food is like infused with healing properties. So those are just some of the similarities.
Like across the diaspora, you see the just brilliance of, what we eat is not just about it tasting good, but it's for a reason. So you and Miss Erminia, you both have like collards that are stewed with coconut milk, which I think speak to how important those two ingredients are across the diaspora, but also in these tropical climates. Adrian and Ms. Erminia, like, how do you think about creating dishes that honor that past while also speak to your present moment as a chef?
For instance, I picked feijoada, which is black beans or brown beans, whatever beans you have, you can use that. And it's usually made with pieces of meat, right? And come from the enslaved Africans in Brazil. That's what was given to them, right? But later on, with the time, feijoada today is considered the national dish of Brazil, right? But now, like with my daughter generation, I see now how they are moving into become vegans. So now we have feijoada that is vegan, and it's beautiful. So with the rice, with the greens, with the sliced orange, and it's a beautiful plate. And full of health, because the onion is in there, the ginger is in there to fight inflammation, the onion is great to keep your lungs clear, the garlic. So we are always thinking about our health, because that was necessary for us to be here today. So we are very smart in how we used those ingredients to exist. That's how I see it.
So, as a chef, and being a Black chef, we will relate to collard greens and sweet potatoes, rice, and beans. Yes. But I started to look even further and really understanding the plant family, where it's from. I decided to go to herbalism school to learn more. And there's so much, as do not tell the chefs, but we don't know anything. We do not know about plants. We don't know if they're indeterminate or determinate. Some of us don't even know how it grows. We just get them in a box, right? And we just start processing it. For me, it was really trying to understand not just culturally, but also locally and how it grows. And then we, Maloma, which is the organization that we have for the St. Helena Island, we went to Cameroon. We took about 30 chefs to Cameroon. Wow. And when we did that, we got to cook with elders. We got to meet other chefs from Cameroon and learn about technique and learn about the different plants that were relations to what we may have lost or never even had as we have crossed over. And there was a certain technique that they were using, which they used on what they called a bitter spinach. And to me, when I looked at it, I said, oh, that looks like collard greens. And they were like, if you do this technique, you get rid of the staunch or the bitterness out of this bitter green. And I said, I'm gonna go home and do this. And so I said, for an event, I'm going to do this technique to take out that staunch. Because, some people don't like collard greens. I don't know who you are, but you're not in this room. Or okra. That's another one. You must love okra.
Careful.
But I did this technique, and it wasn't there anymore. And I started wondering, like, what did we lose when we were brought over here? And what did we gain being here? So a lot of my dishes really look at analyzing that conversation between what you could learn in our culture versus what we may have lost. But I also identify, and I have an event coming up in a couple days, especially I'm talking about collard greens, is the collard seed is related to the brassica family, which is related to the mustard family. So I said, can you make collard mustard? And you sure can. But don't smell it because it does do like a mustard gas. So to back up off of it. But there's so many other elements and varieties and breeds of different flora that we do not know because we have been limited due to, guess what, economy, and due to what's in the grocery store. You'll see about 2 different collard greens in the grocery store when there's over 250 to 300. I think Mama Kay's here. She can correct me on how many varieties there are. But we are losing and lacking that education as in the common population. But I believe as a chef, it's our responsibility to learn these things because there's one thing we can do. We can make you love it or we can make you hate it. And if I can make you like kale, which nobody was eating kale in the 80s, it was a decorative thing next to parsley. And now you're getting kale salads and using kale powder and using it in your smoothies and such. We have such an ample opportunity to really explore and let people understand that our culture and our food and the diversity, and especially within the medicinal.
Can I
Yeah,
ask,
absolutely right.
can you reveal the technique or is it a
I was going to ask
secret?
that too.
Oh, you want the technique?
Yes.
I'm here about spreading the love. So we went to the mountain city and we got to meet the Sultan. And a part of that, we also got to meet the Queen Mother. And she was making their national dish. And the bitter spinach is if you massage it with salt.
Oh, wow.
Just as easy. And you start thinking about when we were here, how much salt did we really have? We really didn't have that much salt. So what did we add? We added salt back. We added smoked pork.
That's right.
To maintain it, but they had an ample amount of salt. So if you massage it, you have your greens in water. You massage it with salt. You will start seeing the chlorophyll come out of the water, and you will see it being like a bright, brilliant green. Wash them again, and then you boil them. They will cook quicker, and they will lose the staunch of the bitterness from your collards.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
I did not make that technique up, but you can put my
No.
name on it.
No, speaking of the kale thing, like I'm working on a story about oxtails right now and how everybody loves
They're expensive
oxtails.
right now.
They're
girl.
so
I can't
expensive
even,
right
I can't
now.
even afford them.
And that's the story is how we got to oxtail pizza, oxtail.
Oh, yeah, I heard
That's a whole
about
nother
that one.
panel.
Oxtail and
But-
plantain noodles. I saw that this
It's all egg rolls
Yes,
too.
egg rolls, everything. But just going back to the way that economy and these different forces change the way that we relate to cooking and relate to eating, how have you seen climate change affect the communities that you've researched in working on your book projects on?
Y'all, it's really hot, and it's getting hotter. And when I was traveling to do research for Islas, like, I'm from Puerto Rico. I grew up in the South. I'm comfortable in the heat. I like being hot, right? Not everybody does, but it is hot. And every island that I traveled to, when I would talk to people, what have you noticed? It's so hot. Just the simplest thing. It's just so hot. So that heat, I'm gonna grab my phone really quick because I wanted to read something from a recent email with a farmer who I was speaking to. The heat, of course, is leading to two big consequences, which are drought and as we've seen all over the tropics, and as we just saw in Lahaina last year, wildfires, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
And it's perhaps counterintuitive, which I think is part of what's tough for islanders, because the perception of a tropical island is that is lush, abundant, surrounded by water, full of fruit. No. People import 90+% of their food on most tropical islands, and they do experience droughts, and they do experience wildfires, and those are worsening. So I've definitely seen that, and I've seen the impacts of that on many people. And when I was in Curaçao, for those of y'all who aren't familiar with Curaçao, it's in the Caribbean. It's a desert. It's already a very, very hot, dry place. It's always been a desert, and there, I mean, you know, heat that will literally melt the soles off of your shoes. Just heat that human beings can't live in, which then leads to other kinds of energy concerns. But I one thing just to honor the resilience of our people and the things that people are doing. I was recently speaking with Tara Rodriguez Besosa, who is part of a project in Puerto Rico called El Departamento de la Comida, which is a food, they do a lot of things, but they're largely a conservation seed saving space. And I was just checking in on them. How are you doing? What are you doing in terms of climate change and how to get, and she says, yes, we're making small products, all based on crops from neighboring farmers. The idea is to preserve, both as in saving crops for climate and colonial disasters, as well as cultural work, and to create our own economic sustenance as a food hub. So currently, this one tiny project in Puerto Rico, just in what they have on that island, is making banana flour, breadfruit flour, coconut flour, jams, marmalades of mango, banana, ginger, and relish, cucumber. They're dehydrating bananas, plantains, jackfruit, and start fruit. They're making tomato sauces, dried oregano and other herbs, ginger powder, turmeric powder, and other things like that. So this is also something that actually, because climate change can feel so constricting and terrifying, people on islands are surviving, and they will keep surviving, they will keep thriving, they will keep figuring things out. And this is a method that I'm seeing more and more. And I wish these projects could be bigger. I wish that they were better funded. But what I'm seeing is people finding sort of like your daughter's generation moving into being vegan, right? The everything we need to live well is already here, right? And technology is being used to do all sorts of other things. Technology can also help us figure out how to preserve what we already have, how to turn protein-rich things like breadfruit into flours that will continue to nourish our bodies and be delicious. So on the one hand, I am seeing a lot of struggle. I'm seeing health issues related to heat and dehydration, and for unhoused people, right? It's really, really difficult. And I'm also seeing a generation sort of take up the mantle and start to produce from what the earth is giving us.
Yeah. And it's so similar between Puerto Rico and USVI. How much is imported, how much is brought in. And it is counterintuitive because you think of an island as this lush paradise where things can just grow all the time. And, for certain colonial reasons, that doesn't happen.
And I'm glad that you said that because, we also have sugarcane growing here in the African American garden. And one of the biggest reasons why many islands aren't able to grow enough food for their people is because they were all cash crops, right? They were all colonies. Right. Yeah. And so Puerto Rico was all cane. And those things, the legacy, that post-colonial legacy is something that we're continuing to fight against.
Yes, if you want to learn more about that, there was an excellent panel last year at the opening of the gardens by Dr. Scott Alvarez Barton about sugarcane and its history in the Caribbean. So I highly recommend you watch that. Speaking of the garden, one of the beds that was so exciting to me was creativity. We talk about, or I've noticed anyway, in stories, we tend to talk about our ancestors in this like passive sort of way of what they produced and not, they had their own dreams and goals and ambitions, and creativity, I think, really speaks to that. The New York Times had a great video essay about basket weaving in South Carolina and that practice of using palm fronds to create baskets and how it's being lost but preserved also. For this conversation, I looked up Brazilian instruments and the creativity of using different gourds and strings. And so I'd love to hear from you, Ms. Armenia, about creativity in terms of agriculture and our ancestors and what you've seen.
Okay, when we talk about the creativity in the gardens, I look into, to me, it's connected with my spirituality. Okay, because then I start to understand the strength of the herbs. What rosemary is good for. Well, my aunt used to call that's the herb for happiness. If you're not feeling too well, take a regular shower, boil a little bit of rosemary, let it cool off, and then pour over yourself. And then you tell me how you feel after. And I'm like, really? Said, yes. That's another way that we use our herbs in our gardens. And I use up to today, and I pass that on to my children, especially when they travel, when they are away, like my daughter is in Brazil now. So, you know what you have to do, Zaza. Don't you worry, you're going to get what you need. And that was passed down to me through my mothers and grandmothers.
And they package it as aromatherapy now and try to charge you a crazy amount for it. But it's so ancestral, and it connects you to a history and a place and the people. Like, it's such a beautiful practice.
Yes, it's necessary, especially the time that we are living now.
Exactly. What about you, Adrian?
I mean, for me, so my family, I was blessed with a lot of aunts, but they were my great aunts, but we called them aunts. And food was just in peril as part of our family, mostly centered. I had an Aunt Cookie. My daughter's named Sweets. We really impactfully used the names. But one thing that we were always taught is the recipes were always told orally. And when they tell you recipe, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and they never wrote it down for you. My grandmother, my nana, she was the cookbook editor for the church cookbook. So one thing she did is she gave all the girls copies of the church cookbook as passing down. But we had this thing when we would move away and, you would forget that recipe. They would never tell you on the phone the recipe. They'd be like, was it 1 teaspoon or 1 tablespoon? And my grandmother would tell you, well, it looks like you haven't been home in a while. And I would have to drive all the way back home to get this recipe. But it was about cooking it with them and learning those techniques with them. And, I was scribbling. I had my phone. At one time I scribbled, but now you have your phone and you kind of write it down. And but learning those techniques. And as my kids are getting older and as my sister's calling me from DC, I'm like, I ain't giving you that recipe. You better go home. I had to do the same thing. But I think it's about the connectiveness, right? Being together with your family, figuring out what those recipes were. How do you pass them down? Because most of our recipes were named after our aunts, because that's where we got it from. So you would hear, this is Aunt Cookie's recipe for so-and-so, or this is Nana's pound cake recipe. And you'll hear me say it all the time, this is Nana's. I think that helps continuing the legacy, especially within my family, of understanding, they ask, who was that? Then we can go into a story about that. But within the gardening aspect, all of them had a garden. All of them grew something. They all got on the phone. This was the 80s, and they talk about what they were growing in their gardens. And for me, as I have my own garden, I really think about our ancestors, and thank you for talking about soil, because that was really huge for us to understand that in the past and the present and where we stand in it. But I also remember the violence in the soil, what has happened within the soil, and I always say there's blood in the soil. And for us to have massive respect for what we put our hands into and what that soil gives us.
Yes.
That is very big for me. And I try to put that forward in my work, in the kitchen, or even just in talking to everybody, and even to my children.
Yes.
Vaughn, what about you?
So many things. Two things come to mind. One is a pilon, or a mortar and pestle.
Oh, yes.
In Puerto Rico, we use something called a pilon. It's typically about that big. But the indigenous Taínos who were on that island prior to colonization had large pilones like this big, which are very similar to large mortar and pestles used across West Africa that you sort of balance with your feet.
Yeah.
Like this. The ingenuity and creativity of all the things you can do with pounding, right? You
Yeah.
can make a dough, you can make a spice blend, you can make a season, you can produce whole bits of
Yeah.
food. So I think about our tools and pilones that are created from trees, right? So
Yeah,
it's
yes.
like we haven't even talked about the trees in all of
Yes.
this, but the trees are also part of the garden, right? And then I think about a dish that I learned about from Vanuatu, which is a teeny island nearish Fiji is probably the closest reference point in the Pacific. And the Ni Vanuatu are an indigenous community that continue to be the largest indigenous community of that place. They are very different than Puerto Rico, where we don't have a very close connection to our indigenous roots. In Vanuatu, they very much are still living and breathing on the same land with the same people that have been on that land for a very long time. And they create a dish that's called lap lap. And it's created, and it's every family has their own version, right? But you start with hot volcanic stones, which you put in the ground in a slightly recessed earth oven, right? So not super deep, but maybe a foot, maybe something like that. You heat these volcanic rocks, and then on top of the volcanic rocks, you apply banana leaves, which are abundant across tropical islands, right? So you make basically as you would with parchment paper today, right? You make a bed of banana leaves. And then on top of that bed of banana leaves, you put literally whatever it is that you want to prepare. Typically, it's a combination of potentially tubers and roots, breadfruit, cassava, yams, taro. It might be seafood. There might be tomatoes. There might be herbs. There might be other kinds of protein. Then doused in coconut milk, right? Homemade, rich, thick, creamy coconut milk, and then covered with another layer of banana leaves, and then typically probably some fabric. So while that's coming about, right, it just steams. All of those juices come together, and it just becomes this really incredible flavor. And then that is picked up. The whole thing is picked up from the bottom, transferred to another space, and then the family sits around and eats on the floor with their hands. But it's so tremendously creative because it's not just the residual heat of the rocks, right? It's also the spreading out in order to cook things evenly, and in such a way that your entire community can come and enjoy of the one meal that will be ready all at once for everyone. Because for any of us who have cooked for family, right, having everything done at the same time can actually be really challenging. So one big, beautiful dish for your whole community. Yeah.
That's so amazing. That makes me think of Miss Camille, you said this beautiful quote of a Black mother's garden is not a passive garden. And I think, Black land and Black agriculture, it's never passive. It's always like an active experience. And I'm getting kind of the wrap it up symbol, or signal. But before we leave, I just wanted to share this quick story. My mother was here last weekend from Maryland, and we went to Smorgasburg and Williamsburg. And my mom is kind of a doomsday sort of, always kind of prepping for that. And so we're walking through the garden over there, and she's like, those are dandelion greens. Those look like carrot tops. You could probably forage that if things go down. She's always thinking about that. And so it made me think of how a mother's garden is never passive, and you're always thinking about ways of providing and nurturing and caring for. So with that, I hope you engage with not only the botanical gardens, but also the flora and fauna around you in your urban environments. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for being here.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you, Corsia. Thank you, Vaughn. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Arminia. Thank you also, Camille. Thank you, Sig. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, of course, Jessica, for your wonderful work. I just wanted to remind you that after this, we're actually going to have our official opening of the African American Garden in its third year. So I hope that all of you will join us. There will be trams waiting right outside the auditorium and ready to pick you up and take you there. Be advised that otherwise it's like a 20-minute walk and we're on a tight timeline, so make sure to be there promptly. The rest of the day, there's tons of other activities here at the garden in celebration of Juneteenth. It's Bronx Day today, so be sure to visit the Stone Mill later. There's also cooking demonstrations at the Yale Academy right across the street from the African American Garden. So we'll hope you enjoy the day here at the garden, and we'll see you at the African American Garden. Thank you.